This is the second part of the video. In this section, I'll share how I fought for my dignity, my children, and my future after making the decision to take action. If you haven't seen the first part yet, make sure to click the link in the description to catch up. A crucial part of my response was that I didn't try to demean her. I simply presented the facts, messages, videos, and evidence of her betrayal. I had no intention of being aggressive. I just wanted the truth to be clear to everyone. The media, unsurprisingly, latched onto the story. Family drama always draws attention. But I was prepared for the possibility that facts might be twisted or emotional aspects exaggerated. I stayed focused on my goal. I wasn't seeking fame. I was seeking justice for myself and my children. Alice couldn't leave this unanswered. She tried once again to paint herself as the victim, but this time, it didn't work. Her attempts to convince people that she had merely made a mistake didn't garner the same emotional support as before. People began to see her actions not as the result of unfortunate circumstances, but as deliberate manipulations. Despite everything, Alice remained unyielding. She didn't stop fighting for her children, even though she knew her chances of regaining custody were minimal. I gave her no hope. Her role in their lives was now limited. I wouldn't allow her to occupy the space that belonged to me and my children. For me, this wasn't just a courtroom challenge, but also a test for my children. I didn't want them to see this struggle as something frightening. I tried to explain what was happening and supported them through this difficult period. I knew an important moment was coming when they would ultimately decide what truly mattered to them. It didn't mean they had to choose between Alice and me. I just wanted them to understand that I would always be on their side, no matter how their relationship with their mother evolved in the future. A few weeks after I published my interview, Alice began to appear more distant. All her previous attempts to manipulate the situation had failed. She was willing to sacrifice anything to reclaim a place in my life, but I wouldn't let her. Now, she resorted to a final measure, an emotional attack through our children. She started calling Sophie and Henry more often, sometimes meeting with them under various pretexts, to talk or because, "I miss you so much. You need your mother." The children were no longer as carefree as they had been. They began to ask me about it, and I could sense their uncertainty starting to affect their attitude toward me. "Dad, why does Mom call so often?" Sophie asked one day. I took her hand and calmly replied, "She's trying to reclaim what she lost. But you and me, are what matters most. I won't let her betrayals disrupt our peace again." My words reassured them for a while, but I knew this was only a temporary calm. The more Alice tried to reestablish contact, the more I felt her pressure. She could no longer regain my trust, but she was trying to restore her position in our children's lives. However, my children were growing more independent. Sophie started to defend me, even against her mother's influence. She understood that not everything Alice said could be taken at face value. Henry, too, became more confident, and I noticed he increasingly avoided talking about his mother. Their support meant everything to me. Realizing that she couldn't turn things around, Alice shifted her strategy. She chose another path to improve her social reputation. She began making public declarations about her charitable projects, trying to rebuild the image of a loving mother working toward a better future. But her efforts seemed shallow. Everyone knew this was just another attempt to evade responsibility. I paid no attention to it, but I knew she was prepared to go to any lengths, even if it meant complete public exposure. For me, however, none of this mattered. My family, my children were my priority, and I stayed unwavering in my path. One cold winter evening, as the kids and I returned home after ice skating, I happened to run into Alice on the street. It happened as I was getting out of the car, and she walked past. She acted as if she didn't notice us, but I caught her glance. It wasn't just a chance encounter. It was another signal from her, another attempt to draw my attention. "James, can we talk?" She stopped and looked at me hesitantly. I looked at her coldly, not recognizing the woman I had once loved. I didn't respond and simply headed toward the house, but her voice made me pause again. "I understand you'll never forgive me, but I want to talk, to explain everything. For the kids." Her voice was filled with pain, but I knew it was just another manipulation. I didn't argue but was certain it wasn't the right time for such conversations. I said only one thing: this isn't your place in our lives anymore, Alice. The kids shouldn't have to suffer because of what you did. They deserve to live their own lives. She didn't reply. I didn't look at her again because I knew all she wanted was to come back. But I had no intention of letting her do that. Her place wasn't here anymore, and I didn't want even a shadow of her presence to creep back into our lives. I went back inside the house, where the kids were already waiting for me with smiles on their faces. They didn't know about this encounter, but I understood that one more moment like this could destroy everything I had built with them. I decided I would no longer meet her without necessity, even if she tried again to re-enter our lives. Sophie and Henry were sitting on the couch, and I could see how quickly they had moved on from the brief pause in my presence. They no longer cared about the past. They were happy with me, and that was the best reward for everything we had endured. But I knew Alice wouldn't give up so easily. Whatever she did, she continued to fight, even though she understood her chances of winning were slim. The days grew longer, and I began to feel a creeping fatigue from the constant struggle. Each day felt like the last, and there was something draining about that. While I had created a relatively stable environment for myself and the kids, inside, I felt increasingly tense. Alice no longer showed up physically, but her presence still lingered. Every day brought new messages, from her lawyers, from representatives of organizations she was involved with, even from people unrelated to the situation. All of them tried to influence me, playing on my emotions. She wouldn't leave me in peace, even through others. Still, I stood firm in my decision. I would no longer succumb to her influence. I continued living for myself and my children. Yet, at the same time, I began to wonder, what should I do when this conflict-filled environment became even more overwhelming? How could I move forward when every step felt like a drain on my energy? One evening, after the kids had fallen asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, deep in thought. I realized I might need to take a pause, a moment to truly understand how to navigate the future. I was confident in my current stance, but would it be enough in the long run? I decided, for now, to step back and not respond to her latest attempt at contact. It was my way of taking a moment to reflect, to determine whether to keep fighting or to stop where we had reached. As time passed, I realized that life wouldn't halt, even if I stopped seeing myself as her victim. I couldn't let the past keep me captive anymore. But to take the next step forward, I needed to be ready for a new chapter. I began planning how to make life better for all of us, for my children and for myself. We started traveling more, the kids and I, trying to find new places to escape the ongoing stress. I sought to distract them from everything that had happened. I could see how they began to adapt to their new lives, rarely even mentioning what had happened before. But things weren't entirely simple yet. Despite my calm, I felt new challenges waiting for me. As part of our legal proceedings, Alice had no intention of giving up. She had found a new way to force me to respond. She began using public pressure. She started sharing her feelings on various platforms, trying to paint herself as a mother unfairly separated from her children. Of course, she avoided mentioning the reasons behind our divorce. Instead, she cast herself as a powerless parent, only wanting what was best for her kids. This tactic had some effect on me. Many people, who previously had no knowledge of the details, began expressing sympathy for her. They questioned why I still wasn't allowing her to see the kids. I even received a few unpleasant messages. Some outright stated that I had no right to do what I was doing. It made me wonder if I was doing the right thing. But I felt that if I gave in now and succumbed to her pressure, it would all be in vain. I was working hard to ensure that my children wouldn't suffer from this battle, that they would be happy and not feel guilty because their mother kept creating conflicts. I tried to stay on my path, leaving her behind, even though it wasn't easy. Nevertheless, it became clear to me that the biggest challenge was how to support the children when these actions shook their confidence. All the comments and social media posts created a certain pressure. I saw how Henry began to become more withdrawn, and Sophie was upset, asking me why her mother was behaving like this. I tried to answer honestly without giving her more reasons for pain. I understood that, despite all my efforts, I had to be prepared for the worst. So I made a plan. What to do next, how to ensure peace for my children, and how to give them the chance to grow in an environment where they would feel safe. With each passing day, I became more determined, and together with the kids, we tried to make our lives as calm as possible. I no longer allowed her to be in our lives, even through others' eyes. That was my decision. In the end, I decided I would do everything to make sure no one could take my family away from me. Unexpectedly, after all my efforts that led to a peaceful life without Alice, I found out that she hadn't stopped. She was preparing her next move. She had now filed a lawsuit, attempting to change the custody arrangements. Her lawyers claimed that my parenting methods supposedly didn't meet her standards and that we were not providing an adequate environment for the children's development. I was ready for this. Knowing how well she could manipulate, I already had everything I needed for defense. Documents, testimonies, and even reviews from people who could confirm my words. I gathered everything necessary to defend my right to keep the children with me. Now, everything came down to the final fight. I understood that she was willing to go to extremes to change the situation. But I no longer had doubts. My resolve was unwavering. She couldn't defeat me anymore. Just when I thought everything would proceed without major upheavals, Alice made her move once again. This time, she resorted to an old tactic. She used our mutual connections with some acquaintances. She reached out to a few people who had once been important to me, trying to convince them that I was harming the children. I couldn't believe she had stooped to this again. These were people who knew how deeply I loved my family, and now they had become part of her manipulation. One day, I received a message from an old friend with whom I hadn't spoken in years. He asked me about what was happening between me and Alice. I learned that she had already started spreading her version of events among those who didn't know the full truth. "James, can you really just turn your back on the children like that?" That was just the beginning, and I immediately realized that one of her new allies had tried to convince him to take their side. I didn't respond to his question because I sensed it was yet another manipulative move. They were trying to sow doubt and break what I had so carefully built. All these events started to throw me off balance, but I gathered myself and realized that the struggle would continue. Alice wasn't about to stop. She kept resorting to the same tricks and seemed to have no moral boundaries. But now, I couldn't allow her to manipulate me again. I began setting clear boundaries. All these conversations and attempts to influence me no longer made sense. I knew that my strength lay in my determination, in dealing with reality, not the fabricated scenarios she was trying to create. With each day, the battle grew more intense. Alice used every possible method to create problems in my life. She tried to force me into a compromise, but I wouldn't give in. All her attempts to end my fight seemed like senseless manipulations. Her lawyers continued to file new claims, forcing me to spend time and energy on legal proceedings. I couldn't even rest without receiving another round of documents or subpoenas. She once again tried to attack me through legal channels, manipulating the system and trying to convince others that I was an unreliable father. But these attempts, despite their intensity, only reinforced my determination. I had no intention of giving up. I couldn't allow her to win, even if her move was underhanded and well-planned. This was a battle of endurance, and I was ready for it. At the same time, I saw how this was beginning to affect my children. Sophie was becoming more reserved and serious, while Henry began to withdraw more often, becoming more distant. I understood that this process was not going unnoticed, but I also knew that I couldn't allow Alice to win by exploiting emotional weakness. My determination was stronger than ever, and I decided that I would not let this situation take away the most precious thing I had: my children and my peaceful future. After all the emotional trials, I began to feel that I was finally regaining control of the situation. It wasn't an easy path, but I was starting to understand that my stubbornness and willingness to fight allowed me to stand firm. I no longer gave Alice a chance to control my life through constant manipulation. I saw how she tried to escalate the situation again, but I started weighing my actions carefully. I planned every step, every word I said, every situation that could affect the future of my children. I realized that my peace had no place in this storm, but I was ready to go all the way to make sure she wouldn't win. Now, I saw everything starting to fall into place. I did everything I could to ensure that the children wouldn't suffer from this process, but I couldn't deny that it still affected them. They had become more mature, understanding what was happening, but always staying close to me, giving me the strength to keep going. Alice continued her attacks, but now I saw nothing frightening in it. I knew that for every move she made, I had my countermeasure. I had gained control, and this became my greatest victory. One evening, as I was reviewing documents related to our case, I found something unexpected. One of the latest materials was a correspondence between Alice and her lawyer, which had accidentally come into my hands due to a system error. Reading it felt like a cold shower. It turned out that all her attempts were part of a larger game. She wasn't just trying to get the children back. Her goal was to destroy my reputation. She planned to make me appear in public as an irresponsible father, to paint me as someone incapable of creating the proper conditions for his children, no matter how much I tried to protect them. The correspondence even discussed how to prepare testimonies from acquaintances to make it look convincing. I was stunned. This was the most cynical attempt at manipulation I had ever seen. She wasn't just trying to take the children back. She was trying to rewrite my life, to turn it into a story where there was no place for me. All my efforts, all the time and nerves I had spent trying to prove my responsibility, seemed insignificant compared to this game. But what I learned became a challenge for me. It not only confirmed my suspicions about her methods, but also gave me new strength to continue the fight. I knew this was just another maneuver of hers, but now I was ready to play my final card in this game. This discovery became a signal for me. I couldn't let her win, even if it meant going to extremes to defend my dignity and the future of my children. This discovery became a turning point for me. I could no longer remain a passive observer in my own drama. Now I knew that if I didn't do something radical, the situation would only worsen. I couldn't allow Alice to continue manipulating the situation, even if it meant I had to act differently. My determination grew stronger with each passing day. At some point, I felt that my children deserved to live in peace, without their lives being constantly on the verge of conflict. I began preparing a new plan. It had to be clear, uncompromising, and, most importantly, effective. I reached out to my lawyer to consult about possible courses of action. We decided that it was time to file a lawsuit that would force Alice to prepare for a tough fight. All her manipulations and fraudulent actions needed to be exposed, and my goal was to protect my children and my reputation. This was not an easy decision. I had to completely overhaul my strategy to make a strong impression on the court and the surrounding community. But I was confident that only now, when I had gathered everything I needed, could I act decisively and prepare for the next steps. This was not an easy victory. It was just the first stage in a long battle, but I understood that this time I couldn't stop. Alice had no right to regain control over our lives, and I was ready to go all the way. The court process began, and this marked a new chapter in the fight. All our efforts had led to this moment. Now, I was not only fighting for my children but also for my honor, to prevent Alice from manipulating everyone around us. All her attacks, which once seemed to go unchallenged, now had to be answered. However, the court proceedings turned out to be much more complicated than I had anticipated. She once again started using her old tactics. Witnesses she called claimed that I wasn't paying enough attention to the children and that my behavior could be unpredictable. But I was ready to respond. My legal team was determined and well-prepared. I provided all the necessary evidence that proved my stability, my efforts for the children, and all the facts that could refute her manipulations. This was a tough process, where I realized that truth and justice often outweigh emotions and speculations. At every step, I felt my nerves stretching thinner, but I couldn't stop. This was not just a fight for custody. It was a fight for my life, for my children, and for the future I was building for them. The trial dragged on, and with each new session, the pressure on me increased. Alice once again began actively using her friends and acquaintances to stir public opinion against me. She tried to convince people that I was not just a bad father, but that my behavior was becoming more aggressive, worsening the situation for the children. I knew this wasn't true, but I had to remain calm, as any emotional reaction on my part could be used against me. It was hard not to let myself act on my emotions, but I understood that every step had to be carefully thought out, every word controlled. Still, understanding that the process was taking too long, I began to wonder whether it was worth continuing the fight in the same way. It seemed there was no way out, that even if I won the trial, I would still have to live with her constant attempts to destabilize my life. It was exhausting, and I began to realize that, in order to rid myself of this situation once and for all, I needed to make a more decisive decision. I started thinking about other options to end this conflict, without allowing Alice to take everything I had left. This decision was the hardest of my life, but I understood that I could no longer hold everything in my hands, trying to solve it all through legal channels. In the middle of the trial, I received crucial information that changed everything. One of my friends, who worked in the legal field, accidentally learned that Alice had prepared another maneuver. She was planning to file a new case, claiming that I had been physically abusive. This new move was aimed at further destroying my reputation and forcing the court to side with her. That was the last straw. I realized that if she continued with these manipulations, it could end badly for me. But this was not my style, to accept her accusations or leave everything as it was. I had to act quickly, and I decided to resort to more radical methods of defense to force her to stop. I prepared an appropriate strategy. I decided not only to continue with the legal proceedings, but also to turn to the media. All Alice's manipulations needed to be exposed, so they could no longer have any consequences. My lawyers helped me prepare a solid stance, and I was ready to go public to tell my side of the story. This step was not easy, but I understood that for the sake of my children and my reputation, I would have to do whatever it took to expose her true intentions. I decided that it was time to act decisively. If Alice wanted to play by these rules, I would use every opportunity as well. I invited journalists to cover my side of the situation. I gave an interview where I didn't hide the truth about what was really happening in our family and how my ex-wife was manipulating the circumstances. It was a huge decision, but I knew I had to put everything on the line. Once publicity came to the case, Alice felt the pressure. She tried to calm the situation, but it was already too late. I laid out the facts, showing how her scheming could be uncovered through manipulation with friends, relatives, and even my former colleagues. The reaction was immediate. Alice felt that control over the situation was lost. She started pressuring me through intermediaries, trying to convince me that this was all just my distortion of the truth and that she truly only had the children's well-being in mind. But it didn't matter anymore. Everyone around us saw her true face. As a result, this media campaign had a significant impact not only on the court process but also on her own reputation. Everything started casting a shadow on her image, and she lost any support from people who might have once been on her side. This step was difficult, but it was the right one. I felt that from that moment on, we were on equal footing, and that gave me more strength for the ongoing battle. After the media coverage, the situation became even more tense. The court hearings took on a new level of intensity, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy. Alice's lawyers conducted a real hunt for my witnesses, trying to discredit everyone who spoke in my favor. They tried to present me as someone seeking to abandon his children, unwilling to take responsibility. My legal team was well prepared, and we responded to each of her moves with clear counterarguments. In every statement, we demonstrated all the facts that proved her claims were baseless. However, despite this, I felt that each day in court was taking more and more from me. I began to doubt whether it was worth continuing this process, which could drag on for years, draining more emotions and resources. However, I understood that there was no turning back. I began to realize that each step I took was part of a bigger struggle. This trial was not just about custody. It was about deciding who would leave a healthier family for the children, who would give them a future without constant conflicts. At this point, I was ready to go to the end, even though I knew that every day would be difficult and full of new trials. I refused to think about retreat because for my children, it was a matter of life and stability. Unexpectedly for me, the media started to shift in another direction. New information started to surface. It turned out that Alice, besides manipulating witnesses in court, was actively working on improving her public image. She began participating in charity projects, appearing in glossy magazines as an example of a strong, independent woman fighting for her children. It seemed as if she was trying to continue her game through public images. I watched these moves with an incredible sense that she was diving even deeper into her role. But I knew this was just part of her manipulations. All her attempts to portray herself in a positive light were aimed at diminishing my standing in the eyes of the public and the court. She was doing everything possible to make everyone think I was just someone who didn't deserve trust. This was another moment when I realized how crucial these small details were in our fight. I began to see that every step she took was an attempt to capture public attention and create an image that would be hard for me to break. However, she forgot that I had long studied her strategies. I started thinking about how I could once again turn the situation to my advantage. Now, I needed more than just proving the truth in court. I wanted to expose this duplicity, show that her real intention wasn't about seeking justice for the children, but about her desire to control and manipulate people. With each passing day, the tension between Alice and me grew stronger. She didn't stop with her manipulations, and I felt increasingly exhausted. Every new day brought new emotional challenges, and the lack of progress in court only intensified my fatigue. I couldn't stop this fight, but I felt like I was gradually losing strength. Alice understood perfectly how this worked. She knew that after a long and exhausting process, people began to tire and were ready to make concessions. She expected me to give up, to eventually agree to her terms to bring everything to an end. But I couldn't allow that. My inner emotional tension kept growing. I could feel my nerves were on edge, and each new manipulation from Alice drained me even more. But I reminded myself that everything I was doing wasn't for me. It was for my children, so they wouldn't fall into the trap of these manipulations. This period was tough. I felt like I was trapped in a whirlpool with no way out, and only one thought kept me afloat. I had to be strong for them. Each new day of the trial added more difficulties. I began to realize that the fight for the children was becoming not just a legal matter. It was a real psychological battle, where each of us was trying to convince the court not only of our righteousness but also of who was more stable and responsible. But the case wasn't limited to just the court hearings. It was a war for the future of my children. I became more aware that Alice was trying not only to take the children but also to shape an image of herself as the perfect mother who cares for her children, while I seemed to be putting them second. My actions were being manipulated, covered up with pathetic and false accusations. And although I continued to fight for justice, I increasingly began to understand that I needed to stop this battle just to be with my children. They deserved a better reality than this endless fight. I started rethinking everything. I decided that I would no longer allow them to be a part of this battle. No matter how difficult it was, I had to show them there was another way. My goal wasn't just to win this trial, but to provide a stable and safe future for the children, where they wouldn't be victims of our conflicts. My lawyers supported my position, and we began discussing options for a peaceful resolution. It seemed that this might be the only way to not only preserve the family but also give the children a chance at a normal life. I was ready for this, but not entirely. My emotions were on the edge, and I didn't know if it was possible to really turn back after everything that had happened. After several weeks of continuous court hearings and intense battles, an unexpected turning point occurred in the courtroom. My lawyers concluded that there were options that allowed us to avoid further conflict and still gain joint custody of the children, despite all the accusations from Alice. However, this decision was not easy. I realized that it was time to make the most important choice, to preserve what was left of a normal relationship with Alice in order to continue raising our children, or to completely sever ties with this process, win the court battle, but leave the family in ruins. This was a serious question that made me doubt all my previous decisions. Was it worth being so harsh? This decision became very difficult. I understood that if I compromised, it could offer stability for the children, but at the same time, they would never forget this painful period. I began to understand that sometimes you have to be ready to make not just the right choice, but the one that will ensure their safety and peace in the future. On one hand, I was ready to put an end to this fight. On the other, I was prepared for the final battle. The situation required a dramatic change in my strategy, and I already knew that this time, I would be able to secure a future for the children, even if it meant making difficult sacrifices on my part. After much reflection, I realized that my decision should not only be based on how to win the process, but on what would be best for my children. I knew I wouldn't be able to protect them from all the hard moments, but I could give them what they truly deserved: stability, peace, and calm. We made a step that changed everything. The court ruled for joint custody, where the children could stay with both parents, albeit under certain conditions. However, even this decision didn't give me a sense of full victory. I understood that from now on, our family would never be the same as before. Alice and I could no longer just continue living as we had before. All these years of fighting had left deep scars on us. I returned home with the children, but in my heart, there was a bitterness from having to go through such a difficult battle. But I also knew that this step would give the children a chance at a new life, free from constant psychological pressure. And even if I had to face new challenges later, I was ready to stay calm and move forward. My decision, though it didn't bring a clear victory, was still the right one for our family. This struggle didn't end with a happy ending, but it gave me the opportunity to start a new chapter in life. It was a path full of pain and betrayal, but I didn't give up. I changed my strategy and saw it through to the end, even though I knew it wouldn't lead to a happy ending. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Was my decision to fight for the children in such a ruthless battle the right one? Leave a comment to share your thoughts. If you've ever been in a similar situation, please share your experience. I'd like to know how you handled the difficulties. Your comments mean a lot to me,